Okay, so we're back with the Real Deal Torana. In this episode, we're going to get the engine out, we're going to get it on a crate, and we're going to get it down to Paul Rogers. So Rogers is going to get the converter bit with Dominator. Also on the episode, we might visit the air intakes, and also looking at it, we'll probably do the radiator. So there'll be a bit of muck around the radiator because it's a completely different setup. So stay tuned. Okay, so we've gone ahead and mounted the engine on a bit of a homemade jig, so hopefully this will keep it nice and sturdy in transport. So the boys are going to head down to Dominator and meet Paul Rogers there, and we're going to work out the converter to that flywheel. The reason Paul's going there because he's building the gearbox. So they'll work together, hopefully put the two together, and when I get it back, we'll hopefully have some good news.
Yeah, g'day guys, Paul here from Paul Rogers Performance Transmissions, just with Jace Duncan from Dominator. We've got the Ferrari engine here that the boys are going to put in the Torana. Just going to go through, take a couple of measurements with Jace so he can get the converter set up right. That way we'll utilise the rod shop adapter, custom built converter, we'll make the powerglide up to it. Yeah, Jace will give you a rundown on the measurements we need to take and why we need to take them.
Yeah, we're just making sure that we've got clearance for our bolt heads, which happens a lot. Different size crank bolts can foul on the back of the converter. Spigot depth where it goes into the crank, and yeah, we've got to make sure that we fit inside this step here. The boys are going to drill some holes through so we can locate it, and we'll have to do an access hole through the back here to get in and do the converter bolts up. The converter's got to have 3 to 4 mil end float once the gearbox is on. Converters in the gearbox, we want our 3 to 4 mil pullback, we call it. So yeah, all these measurements whenever we're doing a custom job like this, it's pretty important to get those measurements spot on. Otherwise, yeah, it can cause damage to the transmission and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, a few measurements makes the job easy for everyone, as long as you're accurate. Here we just got a blank, just checking that pilot size. It measures up as forward, so I'll grab this forward back cover, and we'll just make sure that we've got a nice neat fit. Put that in there. Yeah, we don't want any movement up or down, left or right. It's got to be a nice neat fit, but still be able to turn so you can move it around to do the bolts up.
So important piece of information that we just picked up here while we're unbolting the flywheel. Jace was on the ball and noticed that as soon as the bolts were all loosened off a little bit, the flywheel dropped a little bit. The important information there, and the most important part, is that it could stop a failure down the track. So we need to make sure that this flywheel, which is, it's a pretty heavy piece of kit, probably weighs 3-4 kilos. If the boys want to turn this thing to 13,000 RPM, you've got to make sure that this is securely located at the back of the crankshaft. Otherwise, if you get a minor out of balance configuration, 12,000 RPM, mate, this thing's going to the moon. It's probably cutting the car in half, and we don't need anything like that happening. So the outcome of that is we just need to do a little bit of additional machining to the back of the flex plate, the flywheel, so that it will locate on the crankshaft. That way, once it's all bolted up, we'll get rid of these bolts, put a nice set of ARPs in it, and that way when the boys turn this thing up, we don't have to worry about it flying out of the car. So pretty valuable trip down here to Dominator this morning. Had a chance to have a bit of a chat to Kelvin and Heath over the phone about the use of the car, It's been good for Jason and myself, learn a little bit more. Hearing the boys might give it the odd big rev up to sort of the 13,000 RPM mark. That sort of dictates a little bit more information to me as to what I need to do with the transmission. So we'll be looking at a billet aluminium clutch drum. Definitely need to go with an SFI case for that extra added protection. Learn a little bit there with the flex plate flywheel as to having a counterbore put on the back of it to locate it on the crankshaft properly. And yeah, it's given Jace a bit of info as to where he needs to head with the converter. So yeah, I'll give him a bit of a rundown on, Jace will give you a rundown on what he thinks it needs to do converter wise.
Yeah, as Paul was saying, just if the RPM this thing's going to do changes the ball game a little bit. Obviously everything's got to be perfectly in balance, so to keep all that spot on, we'll probably go for a billet back cover. We've got a new Mazak CNC in there now. Yeah, we'll do a billet back cover for it, and same scenario with that sort of RPM. Not so much that's making 650 horsepower, I think, Paul.
Yep.
But it's the RPM. The RPM changes things a lot with big revs like that. Yeah, just got to make sure everything's spot on, and yeah, mate, especially in the balance and locating things, side of things. So yeah, I'll probably give a bit more of a rundown on the converter side of things.
Yep.
Along the track.
Yeah, try and get some information, a dyno sheet, torque and power curve. That way, give Jason a little bit more info to work on how to set the internals up. So we'll be in touch with the boys back at the shop and keep it going, and yeah, keep you guys updated on the progress.
Okay, so the engine's back from Dominator Converters. So I sent the old man down there to work out what we're going to do with the converter. So Paul Rogers was good enough to meet Jason at Dominator, and they worked out a bit of a game plan. We actually learned a bit about the converter, the gearbox, and what we're going to try and achieve. So, like we spoke about a few times, we're going to use the flywheel to hold the converter, not a flex plate, because it's got a trigger on the outside. So when I got down there, Paul Rogers gave me a call and said, what do you plan on spinning this engine to? And we looked into it, and we probably can rev this thing to about 15,000 RPM if we want, which we probably will for a bit of fun, so that's going to happen. When I told him that changed absolutely everything. So the converter's going to be to another level, the gearbox has to be to another level. But the other thing he asked is, what diff ratio are you going to run in the car? And at the moment it's got a 3 ratio, being a burnout car. And he started laughing, I couldn't work out why it was so funny. He goes, if you want to rev this to 15,000 RPM with a 3 ratio, you're going to be doing about 400 k's an hour. So we've worked out the diff ratio we need is a 5:1 ratio. So it's pretty crazy. The reason being is this engine, I think, was a factory 10-speed manual. Now we're going to a 2-speed powerglide, so that changes it all. So I learned a lot there. So that's in the works, the converter and the gearbox. But Rogers has gave us, and Jason at Dominator has given us a couple of ideas what we need to do with the engine to make all this hold together. So we don't want this flywheel coming apart. So if you have a look on the computer here, we've gone ahead and drawn a few things up. So what we're going to make is this locator here, this purple one. So here's our flywheel. The green one is the crank. So we're not making any of that, we're just making this purple piece. So that's the one we're going to be making. If you come back around to the back of the engine, this is the green piece, so the crank. That little purple one's going to locate in the back here. It's going to locate the flywheel. So originally the Ferrari engine had a bearing like this that knocked in the back of the crank and sort of located on the flywheel as well, so about half. We've also got a converter, so the snout converter's got a locate as well. So we're making that locator there. The other thing is too, we've gone ahead, the recommendation, buy some ARP bolts, because you can imagine something spinning at 15,000 RPM, if that comes out, it'll rip the tulle out of the car, my legs, and blow the roof off the car, so they should hold it nice and tight. So the boys have gone and done that. We're going to get that CNC machined up. My next step is with the engine, so they've done that. I'm going to take it back to the car. I'm going to slide it back in position, because one last piece of the puzzle we're going to do on the car is the inner guard. So as you've probably seen in the other videos, there's big holes in the inner guard. We need to fill that in, because we're not going out the inner guard with the big block pipes anymore. So I'll get the gearbox, the dummy gearbox bolted back to this. We'll jam it back in the car. I'll fabricate a new inner guard. And by then, hopefully Paul and Jason have got the converter and the gearbox ready, and we'll start putting in for the final time. Okay, so we've got the exhaust system back from the coaters. We sent it to a local company that's up the road, PPC Coating in Bendigo. We told them we just wanted a matte or a satin black, obviously to go with the car, because underneath that's what it is. So it was Cerakoted, I think it's called the word coated. When it goes on, it was really shiny, and then over time it dulls off. So I'm pretty stoked. That's what we've got there, laid out in bits and pieces. Now, come back over to the car. We spoke about the inner guard, having to do some modifications, all that kind of stuff. So we've got Jamie back down, the guy who done the exhaust, and explained it, and he goes, hang on, you can't fill that hole, it's there for a reason. So he's made the exhaust system so we can take it in and out without moving the engine or the steering or the starter motor. So this hole is actually used, one, for the clearance as it sits here, and two, as you pull the pieces out. So when he pulls them out, he uses that there to get in and out. So I'm going to leave that hole there. What I'll probably do is just tidy it up. It's got a few rolled edges and nicks and stuff, so I'll make that look nice and pretty. So it's stainless, so it saved me a job. So lucky I didn't go ahead and fill it because we wouldn't have got the exhaust in there. So I'll have a bit of a tinker around and we'll be back soon. Okay, so this is going to be the air intake. This little pod filter is going to sit up in this groove up here. This silicone joint obviously will go on the throttle body, and we'll join the two together. It's probably not the best design you could probably come up with for performance, but like I said, this is only a cruiser. The reason I say it's probably not the best design because obviously you've got the exhaust system there, and there will be some heat coming into the pod filter, so you will lose some horsepower and so forth. Maybe long term, I might make a crazy intake that comes down below the front splash apron and get some cold air into it, but for now, this is what I'm going to do. This will allow us to keep moving it ahead with the car and get up to Haltech and get this thing fired up. So I'll start tinkering with this, and hopefully shortly I'll be able to show you what we've got. Okay, so we've got the intakes dummied up. They're just sitting there with the bits of rubber sort of holding position. It looks pretty good. So I didn't say earlier on, but the reason there's these cutouts here and these inner guards, when I first built this car, it had a twin supercharged LS engine in it. So it had two side mount torque stop superchargers that was sitting up in here. So even though it ended up with the big block in it, there was always these scallops here, there. So it kind of looks like it's sort of made for these intakes, so that's why I'm taking advantage of it. So now we've sort of got the silicone joints, a steel sleeve, which comes all the way up here, because one thing is, obviously when we crack the throttle, we don't want that silicone squishing in. So we've got the steel sleeve. Once I get it all done, we'll get a powder coat so it looks as one. These studs, I did mention, we're going to come off them studs, make a bracket, TIG weld it up, and it'll look pretty cool. So I'll go ahead, start getting some measurements, and we'll make some brackets. So. So the right hand side is done. It may look like a flat plate, but it took a lot of hours to get a flat plate done. So what it is, I don't know if you can see the camera, but it's got a massive twist in it. That's there for a reason. The engine's obviously level, the intakes are pointing down, and we're trying to pull it into the engine to clear that header tank. So that's the finished product. Obviously, it's going to get welded to the intake and powder coated. I think it's going to look pretty trick. We put a Rod Shop logo just to try and break it up, otherwise it'd just be a flat plate there. So I'll bolt it on and we'll have a look. Okay, so that's going to be a wrap for this episode. I've got the right hand side intake finished, other than the powder coating. So I'll go ahead and finalise and weld the other side and get them off and get them coated. So the good thing is our powder coat is locally, it's up the road, so a quick turnaround. I've also gone ahead and measured up the stuff for the radiator, so I'll tackle that. It's getting to the point where it's going to be a little bit fiddly. We've got hoses and pipes going everywhere, so we're still trying to work everything's out, so I'll chip away. Hopefully next episode's a bit more interesting, but stay tuned.